So, Rebecca, your topic today, listening. Hey, that's been done by so many people so many times. What on earth is there to cover in listening that's anything like new? I think a lot. And I know you do. And I know you've had some recent experiences and engaged in events around this. So, listening, let's talk about it. Where do you want to go with it for starters?
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about it before, but I still think it's a big subject that's really important, and there's a lot more to explore around it. And you're right, this was following a fairly recent workshop that I attended around deep listening, which is similar to the thinking environment stuff by Nancy Klein. There's certainly elements around that. And Barry, who was leading the workshop, was talking about the different types or qualities of listening. And it is really interesting. So, you know, he mentions about distracted listening, analysing, um, paying attention, listening to fix, and then deep listening. And it's one of those things that I think probably there's a place for all of them at some point or other, and but I think it's about being more conscious of what type of listening we're doing and actively thinking about that. So there are certain, I think it depends on the context that we're in, to what type of listening we might do. And generally, I would say there's probably not enough good quality listening going on with most people. It's one of those things, isn't it? I'm listening because oh, hang on, I'm going to wait until there's a gap in the conversation and then I'm going to jump in with my point. There is a lot of that goes in.
Sometimes we talk about really big things, and this is a really big thing. I'm already thinking, crikey, how can we do this justice in so few minutes?
Yeah.
And of course, my ego-driven paranoia says, for goodness sake, show you're listening during all this. Don't do the stuff you do too often, like interrupt and make it so clear that you want to get in there and say something. So I'm really doing my best to show my listening skills, and genuinely. Well, yeah, I mean, I could make 5 speeches on what you said already, but tell me more. Go further.
And I think that, this is something that we discussed beforehand in terms of what the topic was going to be, and I think you made a really good point around it being a two-way process because it is. I think each person has to take responsibility for their own part in the conversation, and I think again sometimes that's part of the problem. If you're just talking at somebody, not conscious of the situation or not conscious of how much you're speaking or how long you're taking, then that does have an impact on the listener. Listening takes a lot of energy to do properly. And therefore it's unfair to expect somebody to just listen, you know, to infinity or whatever it is. And something that was really resonated with me when we were doing the workshop is somebody did mention, so we were practicing some of the exercises and we literally had, I think it was 5 minutes each way. So one person would listen for 5 minutes and the other person would talk for 5 minutes. They reflected on that and said how powerful and useful it was to have a time limit around it, because then both parties knew I've got 5 minutes all to myself. It's up to me how I use those 5 minutes as speaker. But as the listener, it was like, okay, I just need to focus for 5 minutes. And I think that was really interesting for me. And it was something that I've sort of reflected on a little bit, is actually sometimes we need to put time frames around it. So if we know we're going to have quite a challenging conversation, or if we have genuinely got limited time, make that clear at the beginning of a conversation. Right, I've got 10 minutes now to give you my full attention, but that is it. And then I have to do something else or whatever it is. And then you're setting expectations around that as well. And I think that was a really key point for me.
Hmm. Well, once again, you've thrown at least 8 things in there that I could myself put 12 minutes on. Um, in my former political existence, we spoke with, by pressing a button, a red light came on at the base of the microphone and it started to flash with 10 seconds to go. We were timed. Um, Nancy Klein would have liked that. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we have to talk before about listening being 2 ways. I think too often the speaker could do more to ask themselves questions like, is this of interest to the other person I'm talking to? Am I talking too long? What else could I say to cause this to be helpful to the other person? Because there's a purpose in listening, there's a purpose in conversation. Now, I think sometimes we assume that there's more value in what we're listening to than there actually might be. So maybe we're just giving the speaker a chance and an opportunity of space to say words. But I think sometimes the speaker could say to themselves more often, as I say, what's the person who's listening to this getting out of this? How can I make this better for them? And then it'll become better interactively. I think the triads exercise is always one that resonates with people that you mentioned. I always found that too. To have the discipline of sitting, listening, and not interrupting for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Some people find that an awful long time. Everyone I've spoken to ever says that's an unfamiliar experience, which suggests there's not enough listening going on.
Yeah, and it is interesting because that's the other thing, isn't it? Is sometimes people aren't used to being listened to. So suddenly
Mm.
having that space to be fully listened to is quite uncomfortable, and I think it's about making it as a useful space for both people. You're right. And I think sometimes there are, and this is where I think the different types of listening come in. So if this is a counselling session, then the counsellor is
Well,
there to
it usually
listen.
is.
You know, and this is the thing, isn't it? As that it's about creating that safe space for that person to share. And like you said, sometimes it's just a space for that person to get out of their mind what's in their head, and that's a really valuable thing. But again, I think we can also help the speaker. What would be a useful outcome for you, or what is the most useful outcome for you from this conversation? What is it that you want from this? And then that can help them
Yeah.
clarify what it is. Because this is the thing, when you often hear about this, people go to the doctors with one particular complaint and they sort of get sidetracked. And then just before they leave, because they know the time's up, they then suddenly blurt out what it is that they've really come about. But the time's up then, and I think that happens a lot. So if you have it clear in your head, this is what I want from this conversation, this is how long I've got, I think sometimes that helps to make the process more productive.
Every time I go to the doctors, I come back with something else to add to the list of ailments. So I've given up lately. Yeah, I mean, there's so much in this, isn't there? I mean, we talked briefly, we never rehearsed, but we just mentioned a few things earlier. And it did cause me to think once again of Nancy Klein, an ever present lady in all of these sorts of conversations. And her advice within the thinking environment that listening takes one of three forms. I know the different models you're talking about. One, she talks about attention, interest, fascination. Attention's not too difficult, but it's too difficult for many. Am I actually paying attention to what you're saying, or am I distracted? Am I looking around? Am I giving you the, oh God, how much more of this have I got to put up with type look on the face? So attention is too difficult for some people. Interest, that's about asking questions, showing more, being quiet, giving space, reflecting, not just instantly coming in, like you say. So attention, interest. And then the hard one always is fascination. How can we authentically, sincerely, and genuinely find what's being said or of genuine fascination? I actually believe people are fascinating. I really do. And I believe if given the chance, given the space, and given the interest, you can find fascination in people. Not everyone makes themselves easy for others to be fascinated by, if that makes sense, because they just blather on about themselves, about things that people aren't interested in. Hey, that work, sometimes we've got to put up with that. I think we can still find people fascinating.
Yeah.
If we work hard enough, we can find people fascinating.
I think that's a really interesting point, definitely. And this was one of the um, sort of points in the workshop is he was saying that actually we make a conscious decision to be interested in that person. And I think that's true. And I think if we're listening and fully paying attention, then we do want to know what happens
Yeah.
next. We do want to know what it is they're talking
Yeah.
about. And can we genuinely be fascinated and interested because we're paying attention, and it's like, oh, I wonder why that is, or I wonder what they mean by that, or I wonder
Yeah.
what happens next. And you're genuinely interested in finding what happened and what's coming next from them.
Well, we can convince ourselves of that. I have to say, I know a heck of a lot of people who would find this conversation odd and who genuinely can't. And I was one of those people. I might have said the right words, but I couldn't I couldn't walk my talk. I think I've got better at it through many years of very conscious, deliberate, corrective behavior. I'm doing corrective therapy on myself, if you like. So it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. It doesn't come at all to a lot of people. And you can see who they are by their agitation at having to put up with not speaking, which is very different to listening. And the other thing I'm thinking about now, Rebecca, is good old behavior breeds behavior. It's every day a mantra for me. I think one of the problems a lot of people, not myself anymore, find with listening is, why should I listen to you? You didn't listen to me. And I think giving people more interest and showing more fascination than you were ever shown back is an issue for a lot of people.
There's 2 points there that sort of stick in my mind from what you've just said is um, it doesn't come naturally necessarily. But it is something that can be learned and practiced. So I
Agreed.
think some people just say, oh, well, I'm not a very good listener. And it's like, that's not a good excuse. You can learn to listen. It takes practice, but it's a discipline that you can learn and improve on.
Agreed.
And then, secondly, when you were saying about why should I listen to you when you haven't listened to me? I do get that. But I think by listening to other people, you're demonstrating to them what it's like to be listened to and encouraging them to do the same. So you're almost role modeling otherwise we get down to that petty level, isn't it? Oh, well, you said this, so I'm going to say that, or you didn't do that, and I'm not going to do that. And that's not helpful to anybody, is it? And perhaps this is where the boundaries come in place. If you constantly feel that it's the same person and they're constantly not listening to you, maybe you have to put some boundaries in place and say, well, actually, I've got 5 minutes to give you, or I'm not starting this conversation with you at all, whatever it is. So yeah.
Sometimes I get an echo here, so I'll try and talk over the echo. Sometimes I'll come a bit closer. Sometimes I forget what it is I'm about to say, and I've just done that. Here we go. This is all so unrehearsed and live, everybody. So I'll try and rewind this. So you were saying, yeah, oh yeah, I was going with this. Sometimes I think we don't have those crunchy conversations, which are avoided for fear of conflict, but which might go something like, can I be absolutely honest here, Rebecca? I'm having a problem listening to what you're saying and wanting to find what you're saying interesting because you're not listening to me. Sometimes when it's so evident to me that you're not interested in what I'm saying, I find it hard to get beyond that myself. We don't have those conversations because we think, oh, what's going to happen if I say that? Maybe we should have more of those conversations, and maybe it will lead to more fruitful, or the end of, relationships with people.
Yeah, but wouldn't we get so much further and have such more deeper connections with people if we had conversations with that like that? Sorry. Yeah, and somebody just recently put, I think it was yesterday actually, a post on LinkedIn about asking people how they are. We often do that as a sort of almost like a greeting, oh, how are you? And we're not actually interested in the answer a lot of the time. So people often say fine, and we're not fine, and he was getting at that as actually sometimes do we genuine, and again you think, we're going to open a can of worms if I say that and somebody starts going on. So it's an interesting dynamic, but I think that's an interesting point, is often we say things without really willing to listen back as well.
Oh, the reason I'm putting faces is I've got a story for just about everything. I experimented on this in my last paid job. I've been working for self now since 1992. And in my last paid job, I thought, I'm going to spend today answering, how are you? Very differently. Just see people's reaction. I did that. And I remember one lady said to me, how are you? And I said, well, have we got a few minutes? I'll tell you exactly what's going on for you. And the look on her face of, oh no, what have I just done? Because I started out with, well, I'm glad you asked me the question, and I'm glad you're interested in it because this week's been really tough for me. And then I said, only kidding, I'll just see how you react.
But that's the thing, isn't it? I think if you don't want to know the answer, don't ask the question, because if we want to really cultivate good quality conversations and good quality relationships with people, we have to be willing to listen properly and deeply. And it's not always easy. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to lie, but it's not something that isn't possible with practice.
Yeah, I think this should be a 2 hour conversation. We're already hitting the 15-minute mark, which is very often where we start to wind things down. It's tragic because we only just started on this. We haven't gone into anything like your layers and all the other stuff. We'll have to come back to this one. We clearly are going to have to come back to it. I think what we're really doing is laying the ground and putting the context together. So, as we get close to regrettably having to shut down because, people will find it hard to listen to much more of this, ironically, people are busy. Excuse me. What's the big takeaway so far on an issue we'll return to?
I think it's being intentional about the conversation and your listening. What is it? What type of listening would be most useful in this situation? And how can I listen better?
Well, they're challenging questions to ask oneself. Well, thank you once again.
Thank you.